All right, let's get started. Welcome everyone. My name is Vincent Del Casino. I'm the provost at San Jose State University, and we want to get rolling because we got a lot of information to cover today. We're really excited. So thank you for joining us at the first ever Cal State University briefing on addressing wildfire and smoke impacts in California. To open our briefing, I would like to welcome Senator John Laird, representing District 17 in the California State Senate. He's going to provide some opening remarks. Senator Laird represents the Central Coast of California, and we're proud to say part of San Jose to the south. He serves on a range of committees that reflect his priorities and passions, including as the chair of the Senate Budget Committee on Education and as a member of the Senate's Natural Resources and Water Committee. He's committed to his community service, having served as the executive director of the Santa Cruz AIDS Project. And I would love to talk to you more about that, having been an AIDS outreach activist for years myself in Southern California. And he has some real higher ed street cred. He serves as a trustee at Cabrillo College, and he's taught environmental science at UC Santa Cruz. For those of us in higher education, it's elected officials like Senator Laird that give us hope for the future because he understands higher education and our potential firsthand. Senator Laird's district has been severely impacted by wildfire and smoke. He understands that this is a top issue facing California and that we need to learn and do more. So please welcome Senator Laird. Thank you so much for being here.
And thank you so much for that great introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here. I wish I could stay. About 5 minutes ago, the Senate gavelled to session, a floor below me, and the minute I'm done, I will rush down and join my colleagues. I think simply put, we're at an inflection point about wildland fire in California. If you just look roughly at the numbers, between the 1920s and the turn of the century, just 1 million acres burned in California. That much burned in 1 week this past summer. And going on to a fire season in which 4 million acres burned. And so it is front and center with everyone. It is also that time from the 1920s to the turn of the century really marked a fire policy in California that was completely fire suppression. Moving on from the history of the Native Americans in California, where fire was their friend and burned and cleared, it was to the point that fire was to be suppressed. What that did is there are just millions of acres of fuels intensified that are really ready to go in California. And this then crashes up against a changing climate so that the two of them together make all the difference in the world. The fire that was just mentioned in my home area of Santa Cruz in southern San Mateo County, which took 925 homes this past summer, there were substantial parts of that fire where it had never burned in modern times. And so you put it together with climate, and I was Natural Resources Secretary at the time of the Paradise Fire. That fire moved at 60 acres a minute, just unprecedented. And you mix it with an aging grid and other factors, and it is ripe for disaster in California. And so we have to rethink how we respond. We have to base it on science, but whether it's prescribed fire or fuels preparation projects or restoration, we have to work to make sure that we change how California responds. And that is the important message of today. When I was Resources Secretary, I think half the CAL FIRE leadership had gone to Humboldt State. In fact, the CAL FIRE chief was not just a firefighter, he was a registered forester based on his Humboldt State experience. I know we're joined today by Dan Turner of the Wildland Urban Interface Institute at Cal Poly, where they really focus on this. And it's the only institute, as I think I saw in the slides leading up, that's on that subject west of the Mississippi. So among the 7 campuses of CSU today that are represented is an incredible reservoir of expertise and knowledge. And I think I am grateful that they are prepared to share that with all of you and help us, as those of us on the political side mobilize for public policy and political action on this issue. We need a firm science base. We need a menu of things to do that might be in addition. And we also need to change the public's perception. I think they understand after the firestorms of the last few years that the world has changed. But then the question always to them individually as citizens and lay people is, what do they do? And whether it's fire insurance, hardening houses, prescribed fire, beefed up forces to fight fire in certain places. There are many, many ways that we need to respond. And that's the heart of what today's program is. So thank you for allowing me to join you. I wish you every success in today's program. I look forward to working together to address this issue across California.
Thank you so much, Senator Laird. I think that comment about the inflection point is critical here, because that is exactly where we are. And this is not just a California issue. It is up and down the West Coast. We saw fires in Washington and Oregon. We saw fire in Australia this past year, and other parts of the world. And wildfires are becoming more frequent and more intense year after year. So we have to start to ask ourselves, what can we do? How can we mitigate and adapt to changing fire regimes? How can we respond to these fires before they happen more effectively? And I will say at the CSU, we are tackling this fast-growing problem head-on by making investments in leading-edge fire research, both basic and applied. We're developing models that can predict future trends and studying the soils that persist after a fire. We're also on the ground and almost literally in the fire, researching embers that move from one edge of one fire to a landing place where the next fire might happen. We're working with those, as the senator pointed out, at the urban-rural interface, and are asking how we can better manage local and private forest landscapes to bring back more natural fire mitigation and adaptation strategies. We're also asking how to change how people think about fire. I think the senator brings this up, and it's a critical point for California. On top of all the research work you'll hear about today, you have to remember that we, as the CSU, are passionate about educating the next generation of fire scientists at both the undergraduate and graduate level. Workforce development, which builds resilience in communities and natural environments, is a key part of the DNA of the CSU. As I like to say, and I think this is critical for those on this Zoom call today, CSU students are committed to our region and state. They grew up here, they want to give back, they want California to be livable, sustainable, and affordable. And the Cal State system prepares them to do just that. And I also think I have to say, and I would be remiss if I did not say, that the CSU does all this work in what is probably the most efficient and cost-effective higher education system in the world today. You get your bang for your buck when investing in the CSU. So what are we going to do today? Today, you're going to hear from 8 campuses in our system. This work is exciting, it's important, it's groundbreaking, and it can make a difference in the lives of Californians. At San Jose State, for example, under the direction of Professor Craig Clements, we recently created the Wildfire Interdisciplinary Research Center, a unit now bolstered by a cluster hire of 5 new fire scientists. He and his team have created a state-of-the-art wildfire and smoke forecasting system that has become one of the most advanced in the US. It's also used around the world today. Now, just take that one example of one campus and multiply it by all the other campuses doing this work. And it says, not only do we have the capacity, but we have the potential to directly address the critical questions in fire science research, education, and outreach in the state today. Simply put, we can change the landscapes of California and the world for the better. So with that, I am really excited to get this conversation going and move away from the generalist provost to the experts who really understand what's going on. So we've got representatives from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, Cal State LA, Chico State, CSU San Marcos, Humboldt State, San Diego State, San Jose State, and Sonoma State. Each university is going to do a quick introduction of their program and research. And then if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A, but we're going to moderate this dialogue. After the introductions, we got 2 or 3 big questions that we want our experts to answer. And if there's still time, we can use the Q&A feature for the webinar. We may go over the hour a little bit because we're trying to add so much. If you can't stay on and have to drop off, please know we're recording this and that you can also follow up with any one of our researchers. I've had a chance to meet with almost everyone on this call today. These people are dedicated. They have dedicated their careers to this work. So I'm really excited for you to learn more about what's going on in our system and on our campuses, because I believe the CSU is working to help you, your families, and your coworkers to be safer and healthier and more ready for future wildfires. All right, so with this, I'm going to jump on in and we're going to start with Cal Poly. So I'm going to turn it over to Cal Poly now. Take it away.
Hi, I'm Dan Turner at Cal Poly's Wildland Urban Interface Fire Institute. Devastating fires have become our reality. The natural, socioeconomic, and emotional tolls are great, with far-reaching and long-lasting consequences. It's affecting our air quality, our habitat, water sources, forests and natural resources, infrastructure, businesses, homes, and community, and sadly, loss of life. Based at Cal Poly, the Wildfire Institute is a collaboration of 19 Cal Poly academic programs, partner agencies, universities, and industry, with a common goal of moving beyond traditional fire suppression and protection philosophies. We're a cross-section of practitioners, faculty, and researchers developing a future workforce to build safer communities, protect our environment and infrastructure, make responders safer, and reduce fire consequences. The Wildfire Institute merges forestry, fire protection engineering, city and regional planning, architecture, and 15 other programs to create a holistic, multidisciplinary program studying the evolving climate, forest health, community and building fire risk, fire protection and mitigation technologies, fire economics, and post-fire recovery. Our approach is both a macro and micro level, from community design to evacuation modeling, from fire engineering to structural hardening, from forest management to home landscaping, from community economics to individual survivability, from air quality to responder health and safety, and from satellite remote sensing to preventing ignitions on the ground. Again, this is a program that's unique in the United States, and we're very proud of the process we're making and our goals. Thank you.
All right, let's switch over to Cal State LA.
Good morning. I'm Michael Thomas, the fire protection instructor, leader of the program at California State University, Los Angeles. This program was created in response to the needs identified by the California Fire Services. Cal State LA's Fire Protection Administration program arms graduates with technical and administrative skills that lead to some of the top protection positions in the state. Typically, a fire protection education is limited to lower division coursework taken at the community college level. As the only one of its kind in the state of California, Cal State LA's Fire Protection Administration program produces graduates that have an edge over the competition. Cal State LA alums are uniquely prepared to implement the managerial skills that are crucial in commanding large-scale firefighting operations. Graduates of the Fire Protection Administration program at Cal State LA go on to pursue careers in the fire prevention as fire prevention specialists, fire loss insurance claims adjusters, fire station chiefs, and arson investigators. The Fire Protection Administration and Technology major is a 2+2 articulating program because Cal State does not offer lower division fire protection administration courses. Students in the program complete their first 2 years at a local community college and then transfer to Cal State LA to obtain a bachelor's degree in fire protection and technology. The demographics of Los Angeles warrant more focus on wildland firefighting, and that's what we're starting to look at. A fire in the Santa Monica, the San Gabriel, and the Santa Susana Mountains range can reach the Pacific Ocean from the 101 freeway or Mulholland Highway within hours. So we certainly see a need to turn our focus on the wildland-urban interface fire situation. And a lot of our research is focused toward that endeavor. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eli Goodsell. I'm the director of the CSU Chico Ecological Reserves. We are here today because we're facing a wildfire crisis. 4% of lands in California is burned this past year, resulting in the release of more CO2 than all of the cars in our state combined. Here in Butte County, 21.5% of all of our lands have burned over the past 2 years. In these 2 years, we've lost over 19,000 homes and businesses and more than 100 of our friends, neighbors, and community members to catastrophic wildfires. Chico State stepped up. Within weeks of the Camp Fire in 2018, our president established and filled the Campus Community Regional Recovery Liaison position. This unique position works directly with our communities to determine how Chico State can assist in responding to unprecedented disasters. A direct result is the establishment of the Environmental Resiliency Collaborative, which brings together environmental centers across our campus with community partners to identify and prioritize solutions for current and future challenges. Our students drive this effort, whether assisting faculty to compile the most detailed water quality data set after an urban wildfire in history, or actively participating in fire mitigation projects on over 3,000 acres of wildlands annually. Our students yearn to be part of the solution. With over 8,000 acres of wild and working lands, CSU Chico continues to prioritize experiential learning and fire mitigation and post-fire recovery projects. This is exemplified through the recently launched interdisciplinary master's degree in wildland management and our campus's recognition and respect for Indigenous knowledge and practices. The CSU system will produce our state's next generation of land managers and conservationists. We need the resources to develop and teach the solutions for a safer, more resilient California. Thank you.
Hey, good morning. My name is Dr. Matt Ron, Director for the Wildland and Urban Interface Program at Cal State San Marcos. After the devastating fires in Southern California in 2003, our teams of students and faculty have actively engaged in some of the most consequential issues facing the state. Little did we know at that time, this was just a glimpse of what was yet to come. With the support of CAL FIRE Local 2881, we completed one of the first truly in-depth economic analyses that demonstrated the true costs of these new large-scale fires on our community. And that work quickly identified future research and need that grew into a partnership with CAL FIRE, Local 2881, the International Association of Firefighters, U.S. Forest Service, National Institute of Standards and Technology, local tribes, and many others. What we've learned is sobering over those years. Our firefighters are working under some of the most extreme and hazardous conditions known to humans, evidenced by the dramatic incidents of occupational heart attacks and strokes, respiratory illness, and cancer. The destructive toll on their mental and behavioral health is only now being understood. And it's this new normal that's here to stay. And that's where we've made a promise to help. In response, Cal State San Marcos launched its first and only one of its kind degree and in workforce development and training, specifically focused on wildfire science and the urban interface, designed in partnership with key agencies and organizations. It was created with working professionals in mind. This fully online program allows for the inherent flexibility needed for our frontline firefighters to help advance their careers and their knowledge for the betterment of themselves, their departments, and the industry as a whole. The Wildfire Conservancy was also formed in collaboration with CAL FIRE Local to provide direct research support Everything we learn from our research with our faculty and even our student projects is brought into the virtual classroom to ensure that the program stays on the forefront of education and training, and our students are best served for their community. This includes curricula that's being taught for the first time anywhere, including topics with a focus on climate change, the recovery of ecological systems and soils post-fire, occupational cancers, exposure from both smoke inhalation and skin exposure from soot and ash, and wildfire policy and law. And uniquely, the first course in the nation that focuses solely on firefighter mental and behavioral health. Toward the end of their tenure with us, all of our students participate in their own research projects in collaboration with our faculty and agency partners and their own departments in many cases, helping them become better scientists, problem solvers, and decision makers. Unfortunately, research continues to be an unfunded mandate, albeit a critical part of forwarding wildland firefighting and education and moving it a generation forward as we need to. We at Cal State San Marcos appreciate the opportunity to share our story and keep our promise that was made to help protect California and our firefighters from one of the most consequential and economically devastating threats to our state. Thank you.
Hello, Jeff Kane, Associate Professor of Fire Ecology and Management at Humboldt State University. And as Senator Laird mentioned, we have a long history of providing high quality education to the future fire and forest managers. And we do this by engaging students in research and in management. In addition to offering excellent teaching, Humboldt State University professors are also researchers. Over 12 faculty members are engaged in the wildland fire in research related to the wildland fire challenges and opportunities. And they have published over 100 papers in the last 10 years and brought in about $10 million. So some of the research topics that we focus on here at Humboldt State are largely involved in ecological and environmental impacts of wildfire and fuels treatments, whether it's cultural resources, incorporating things like traditional ecological knowledge, preserving rare, threatened, and endangered species, improving biodiversity. We're also engaged in research related to alternative treatments such as biomass utilization and social science research related to fostering collective action to help improve outcomes. We do this through partnerships with a variety of governmental agencies, nonprofit organizations, tribal governments, and timber companies. These are the people that are on the ground doing really innovative, creative work. And we engage with them to try to provide service in the form of science and knowledge to help improve their outcomes so that we can develop a more fire resilient California.
Good morning. I'm Megan Jennings, a research scientist and director of the Institute for Ecological Monitoring and Management at San Diego State. With $11 million in fire-related funding received over the last 5 years, SJSU researchers have engaged in a wide range of studies, including fire mapping and modeling, climate-fire relationships, impacts of fire on wildlife, vegetation, and water resources, the use of innovative technology and social media to inform emergency management, and much more. One project that highlights SDSU's contributions to actionable wildfire research is the Connecting Wildlands and Communities project, funded by the Strategic Growth Council's Climate Change Research Program through the California Climate Investments Initiative. I co-lead an interdisciplinary team of faculty and student researchers in this work, focused on climate adaptation planning in Southern California, specifically addressing the needs of wildland-urban interface communities. Together, we're working to bridge the gap between ecosystem and community resilience planning by assessing climate risks and the multiple benefits of coordinated strategies to reduce fire risk, promote water sustainability, and protect biodiversity in both our wildlands and communities. Our diverse network of partners include local jurisdictions, regional planning agencies, conservation organizations, and tribal governments who are all committed to climate resilience. These stakeholders have helped guide our research and are looking forward to putting the science and data that we're developing in this project and many other projects to use. Thank you.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I'm Craig Clements, Director of the Wildfire Interdisciplinary Research Center at San Jose State and Professor of Meteorology. So I want to share a few unique aspects of our new center at San Jose State. We develop and operate the most advanced fire and smoke prediction system in the US, and it's the same system that's been adapted all around the world. As you can see in this graphic, we can forecast not only where the fire spreads, but when and where the smoke will go. The system allows us to pinpoint minute by minute the fire, the weather, and the smoke. And these factors, we can look at how all these factors will impact communities. This graphic is actually the forecast from August 2020 during the summer fires near San Jose. And this forecast was used by NASA and other agencies to inform stakeholders. We also have unique observational capabilities with the only mobile Doppler radar in the Western US. This radar system is uniquely tuned for wildfire. And as you can see in the photograph below, it's deployed to active wildfires where we can track smoke in real time. And it allows us to detect extreme fire behavior such as fire tornadoes, hopefully leading to increased firefighter safety. We also offer the only fire weather program in the US. As we train meteorologists in our meteorology department in fire weather forecasting. And this is an emerging need for all utilities in the Western US. And we have a new interdisciplinary wildfire science minor that's a general education degree, and it allows us to train the next generation of fire scientists. Finally, this graphic down in the left corner outlines the center, which includes new faculty in fire ecology, wildfire policy, engineering, and meteorology. And all of these disciplines are linked together so we can better inform policy and plan for fire risk in the future. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Lisa Patrick Bentley, an assistant professor in biology at Sonoma State University. In the past few years, we've increased our effort at Sonoma State to address wildfire impacts in California. We've implemented training and outreach programs and received research funding to empower students and community members to actively participate in the development of strategies to prepare for and mitigate against challenges in our increasingly fire-prone Northern California landscape. Importantly, some of the biggest advances in wildfire research have been led by graduate and undergraduate students in the School for Science and Technology and the School of Social Sciences. My interdisciplinary team focuses on quantifying above ground carbon stocks and fire fuel loads. The California Air Resource Board estimates that 85% of carbon stored in the state's land base is found in forests and shrublands, but there's 20 to 40% uncertainty in that estimate. Measuring precise dimensions of trees is key to determining how much climate altering carbon is stored. In addition, fuel loads are difficult to measure, but need to be accurately quantified to mitigate the severity of wildfires. My team uses terrestrial laser scanning technology, multispectral sensors, and photos taken from drones to assemble detailed 3D pictures of forest structure. We're finding that our methodology can increase the accuracy and cost effectiveness of forest management. In addition, we have developed new approaches for estimating variables that allow for fire probability and behavior models to be validated or refined. As our program continues to grow, we plan to collaborate with diverse stakeholders to incorporate our results into online tools and culturally relevant outreach materials to allow landowners and renters, many of whom come from low-income households, to apply for funding to remove fuel hazards and strengthen community wildfire resiliency.
All right. Thank you, everybody. That was clearly a quick dash through what is a very complicated landscape of research and teaching. But I want everyone to note who's on this call, and I mentioned it earlier, that what the Cal State system does so well is bring together those big, important, big science research questions and grounds them through the work of students. So every day we've got students engaging with our researchers to address questions about wildfire and smoke impacts and the implications for California. So with that, what I want to do is turn to our experts now and open up a brief campus dialogue about some of the big questions that we're trying to address in the system. So first up, we want to talk about climate change. So I'm going to turn to my colleague at San Jose State in the Wildfire Interdisciplinary Research Center, Craig, and ask him, How has climate change contributed to wildfires in California, and what should we expect in the future?
Thanks, Vin. So, well, there's no doubt that the fingerprints of climate change are all over wildfire in our state. Right now, there's a red flag warning in Southern California, and it's the middle of January. Increases in fire frequency, size, and intensity are driving more erratic fire behavior than ever before. Examples of this include fire tornadoes, huge fire-generated clouds, and long-distance ember transport that affect communities. And as the climate warms and dries, the fuels become easier to ignite, making fires easier to spread. So we can only expect this is going to get worse in a warming climate. One limitation in our understanding of fire behavior is actually the lack of observations. We need better observations to develop new modeling tools to predict future fires in our warming climate. And so to address this lack of data, my team and I are building new sensor systems that can be flown on drones and suppression aircraft. And these new data, along with our radar observations, allow us to further develop the wildfire and smoke forecasting system and allow us to simulate not only current fires, but fires in the future. So for example, things that we have to look at is how much larger fires may become, how frequent and stronger Diablo and Santa Ana winds will be, and what future conditions will impact communities the most. And so answering these types of questions will help inform fire suppression and fire operation decisions and help us identify communities at risk, which will enable the creation of better wildfire policies. So there's a number of things that we can do. And every campus is looking at this problem in a different way. And so we need to increase our observations, our data, and our modeling tools to better fight wildfire in a changing climate.
Jeff, how about you at Humboldt State? You want to jump in on this question? It's an important one.
Yeah, I'll agree with what Craig said, but I'll also emphasize that really in the short to medium term, the only real tool that we have to mitigate the negative impacts of fire is through our vegetation management. These are things like thinning, prescribed burning, utilizing these small trees, finding creative markets for these solutions so that we can modify the fuel environment. And that is really the main way we can affect change on the ground and reduce impacts to communities, reduce impacts to forest resources and the biodiversity heritage of California. And so there isn't a one fixed solution. It's going to take a lot of just tweaking and adjusting and trying different things. But by and large, we need to expand the use of prescribed burning. And this can be use of broadcast control burning, but also pile burning, and also incorporating thinning treatments in our forests, right? These young forests are very susceptible to high severity fires and are part of the problem. And so that is the main way we can really improve solutions.
Dan, with your work at your own institute at Cal Poly, how are you thinking about this question?
So what we've experienced in the climate change question is what's happening, and the most dramatic is the longer dry season. We're seeing the shoulders of the rainy season contract, and as a result of that, that's changing two significant things. One is we're exposed to more severe wind events that happen in the fall, winter period, and the early spring period that didn't exist before. Paradise typically at the time that fire occurred would have already had snow. So things of that nature we're seeing on the climate change that are very dramatic. The other thing that's happening is it's affecting the plant communities. The species that are fringe species that are on the edge of survivability with the change in rainfall patterns, we're going to see those species start to suffer significantly. As a result of that, they're going to become more stressed and more flammable, much of what we've seen in the Sierras this last summer with the bug kill that occurred up there. We're seeing the consequences of that. That's just a demonstration of the climate change impacts. So at Cal Poly, we're looking, locally, we're looking regionally, we're looking statewide, and then with our partners, University of Montana's Fire Center and our with the Association of Fire Ecology. Or one of our professors is the international president. We've been working with Australia and Chile and Europe on patterns that they're doing the same thing. They're seeing the same kind of consequences in these Mediterranean type climates. We're going to see more fires in the chaparral and oak woodland areas. You know, a lot of focus is on timber, which is important, but most of the people in the wood that live in the wildland urban interface live in the chaparral and oak woodland environments, and those are very susceptible to fast moving fires. And they're also in areas, particularly Southern and Central California coast, are subject to very high wind events. So we have to be prepared to deal with that, understand it, and then how do we mitigate that through, you know, community design, through forest management, through prescribed fire and other treatment methods that are going to try to replicate a normal fire regime without consequences that we're seeing.
Thanks, Dan. Michael, you know, CSU LA, I know you have some thoughts about, you know, the intersection of climate change and wildfires and what we might expect as well. Do you want to jump in real quick here?
Yeah, I concur with a lot of things that were said. You know, as the world continues to get hotter and drier, however you want to term it, whether it be climate change or global warming, most experts believe that wildfires will become even more intense in areas like California, Australia, and the Mediterranean. I mean, it's an international issue now, and like was mentioned, we have to look at new ways of dealing with these type of fires rather than just response. You know, there's preparation, mitigation, response, and recovery. We have to look at all these areas to deal with these catastrophic fires. The more accurate term is fire management, which places the emphasis on the hazard rather than a specific habitat. And I agree that you can't just blame the increase of wildland fires on global warming. I mean, that's kind of a buzzword, but we've got to be more cognizant of other areas that we have to address to deal with these catastrophic fires. And everybody has responsibility. The community, you know, fire agencies, and a lot of the associate departments that we reach out to during these type of incidents.
Thanks so much. And Megan, down at San Diego State, I know this is an important part of the research that you're working on. You want to give us some thoughts here as well? Really appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot about how more frequent and prolonged droughts and warmer temperatures can cause vegetation mortality, can drive fuels, which increase fire risk, but also how it affects post-fire recovery. And really, without concerted action guided by scientific research, this is going to continue to get worse, and it will continue to reverberate both through our communities and our natural landscapes. And so some of that work I talked about earlier at San Diego State, it really focuses on fire as an ecological process, both looking back at past history and also thinking about projections of future climate change. So we can better understand those relationships and the processes that affect wildfire risk, in particular in the wildland-urban interface that we've been talking a lot about today. So just as an example, we're working to explore how increasing fire frequency, in particular in Southern California, can lead to ecological shifts from shrublands to non-native annual grasses. Those grasses are more flammable, they create a feedback loop, and that leads to even more frequent fires. So trying to break that cycle is something that we're focusing on, giving folks tools to find the data and find out where we're at risk of that vegetation type conversion. And this is really an interdisciplinary approach. We're using this information to assess the potential impacts in the WUI, thinking about communities, watersheds and streams, conserved lands. So it's not just about fire, but how all these systems are interconnected. And we really think this comprehensive approach, considering the interrelated systems and processes, is critical to understanding wildfire, the ongoing impacts of shifting climatic conditions, and helping us create opportunities to safeguard our communities and ecosystems from climate change.
Lisa, I know that at Sonoma State, these questions are right at the forefront, literally, of your everyday lived experience, and your campus has been through so much. So as you think about the intersections of climate change and fire science, what are the big questions that you're thinking about, or what are the other kinds of issues we need to be talking through?
Sure. Well, I agree with the other speakers that have mentioned that there's really general consensus that fire occurrence is going to increase with climate change. And even though there's some variability in the projections for the number of wildfire events, it's estimated that the total amount of area burned in the state of California might increase somewhere between 15 and 50%. The effects of these fires, as the other speakers have mentioned, are like investigating the effects on vegetation is very important. But what I wanted to point out, because we think about the interaction between our community members and fire, as you mentioned, we've experienced that, very recently here in Northern California, that humans are responsible for igniting actually 95% of the wildfires in the state. And so I think more research needs to be done looking at the interaction between humans and human infrastructure, fire ignitions, and the probability of structure loss. So while climate, topography, and fuel variables are really important, it's also interesting to look at this wildland-urban interface. California is one of the most populous states in the United States, and large communities are developing in and around these fire-prone landscapes. And there's going to be this balance between increasing and decreasing the likelihood of wildfire as these communities develop, with reinforcing and mitigating the effects of climate change. So, recently the governor released a new state budget where it mentions that there's going to be an additional $1 million, right, to support coordinated forest health and fire prevention strategies. There's potentially $39 million for LiDAR remote sensing and research. Something that I mentioned when I talked about the research happening at Sonoma State is that we are using this type of research, and hopefully in the future, we can use some of our results with future funding from the state to inform policy decisions to integrate this information about the effects of fire on vegetation, climate, hydrology, and fire risk at the wildland-urban interface.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I really appreciate it. Okay, I want to turn the corner a little bit, although climate change drives and is part of probably every single question we might ask. But Matt, at CSU San Marcos, want you to reflect on wildfire and smoke and its impact on some of the most vulnerable populations in the state today, and perhaps how that links back to this question of climate change as well.
Sure. Well, thanks. I think when we talk about vulnerable populations, air quality research tends to focus on the young and the elderly and those who are immunocompromised. But arguably one of our most vulnerable populations are the first responders. Recognizing that the folks who are out there, whether they're the frontline firefighters, or the other folks from law enforcement or others that serve a critical role during these large-scale devastating events, recognize that the best technology we have is what you see on the back of the gentleman's helmet behind me, is nothing more than a bandana that they wrap around their face. We simply have to move this industry forward in a meaningful way, not just, again, for those first responders. Everything we learn from research on being able to address occupational exposures can be applied to the communities. And I've seen some comments on things like evacuation planning and so forth for communities. And we need to recognize that all of that, wherever we put people in the event of a large scale fire, could be placing them at continued, exposure risk. And we can't discount the dermal risk either. The soot and the ash and everything that absorbs through our skin is our largest organ. We're only now starting to understand the effects that has on folks as well. And unfortunately, we don't have the kinds of robust decontamination protocols and other things that are necessary to help protect these folks in the long run. And so there's a lot of work to do. And I appreciate the comments on the climate change issue. That is certainly, at the forefront of everyone's mind. However, we also have to recognize that well over 95% of all the fires that are started in California are actually the results of human activity. I think a lot of our colleagues sort of echoed this as well. Climate change is a big driver. So is the last 100 years of decision making that we've made in this state, whether it's with our fuel reduction and management programs or how we build out our communities. We have well over 5 million homes in high risk areas in the state. And according to our calculations, just a rough back of the envelope says we've only built out about 35% of what's capable in this state as well. And so we really have to start making some tough decisions about how we design California in the future, provide more resilient communities, and make sure that we protect our community and our first responders from the devastations and all of the fallout that happens during these incidents.
Thanks so much, Matt. We have a little less than 15 minutes left and want to make sure we get to everybody. And we've got a third question I'd love to get to. So Jeff, briefly thinking about vulnerability and the intersections here, how have you been thinking about it in the context of your research and teaching?
Absolutely. So I would like to reiterate that the issues related to climate change and our past land management practices of fire suppression that still continued in a large part today are a major part of the problem. And this situation has really created unprecedented circumstances that put a lot of rural communities at risk. These are people that live in a very rural wildland-urban interface, for lack of a better word, and their homes and properties, their timber resources are in jeopardy, and there's not as much attention and resources to these areas. And so the other part of this is that the practice of prescribed burning has been something that has been lost over the years, that is being revitalized now because of the magnitude of the problem. But these are communities that have lost this ability to do this, whether it's private ranchers, whether it's tribal communities that had culturally practiced this prescribed burning. And so these communities really need attention, and they need to, the circumstances they're living with is something that was developed over the last 100 years. And so I find these communities to be quite vulnerable to both wildfire but other climate change related problems.
Megan, similar question for you. The question of vulnerability is really a significant issue because of the ways in which fire operates in relation to our everyday socioeconomic lives. So how do you think about this question?
Yeah, we know that wildfire vulnerability is greater in a lot of under-resourced communities in California. And one of the groups that we work with extensively in some of my research are tribal communities. Many of our reservation lands in Southern California are in the wildland-urban interface in the line of fire. Risk is very high, and they're trying to come up with adaptation strategies and resilience strategies to protect their communities and lands. And in fact, the project I spoke about earlier today, that was actually inspired by ongoing conversations with our tribal partners who were saying, we need help. We need data and information to help guide us in making our communities more resilient to fire and protecting our water resources, folks on well water, just as another example. And the great thing is, I think this has really created an opportunity for us to merge Western scientific thinking with traditional knowledge and the practice of indigenous stewardship, and really learning from that, both to assist tribal communities, but also perhaps to learn so that we can apply some of those practices in our local jurisdictional planning. And the great thing is that really has benefits for cultural, community, and ecological resilience. And I think we're really fortunate to have a large group of coordinated tribal governments and organizations that we work with, over 20 of them here in Southern California that we work with. And they're really excited. And I think we can look to those groups to see the work that they're doing and learn from them and inspire other action across California.
Awesome. Thank you. Lisa, same question on vulnerability. Reminded that we got about less than 10 minutes to go. So we want to keep tight and add where we can, but these are critical questions for our state.
Sure. So I just want to echo what some of the other speakers have said and talk about how these vulnerable communities are able to mitigate some of the risks with wildfire and smoke through fuels treatments. And I want to just highlight this working paper that just came out from the Resources for the Future organization, where they looked at whether suffering a wildfire increases a community's odds for getting a fuel project in that community. And they found through this study that nearby fires increase the rates of fuel treatment in communities with relatively high percentages of high income, well-educated white residents, that places where almost all the residents are white saw their chances of getting a fuel treatment go up by 30%. And the odds went up by 40% in places where few or no households were below the poverty line. So we know that there's an issue in California that rising home costs in cities and suburbs are increasingly pushing lower income and minority families into these fire-prone areas. So I just want to echo what other speakers have said, that moving into the future, when we think about mitigating these wildfire risks for these vulnerable communities, we really need to reflect these policies. Fire policies need to reflect growing economic and racial diversity.
Craig, given the context of the San Jose area and the greater area that you work in, how do you reflect on this question as well?
Well, just to follow up with what's been said, so vulnerable communities can be disproportionately impacted by smoke because they often live in older homes without good air filtration systems. And so smoke model projections can really help us target resources to those areas with the most need. There are a few basic solutions that we can suggest as well. First, increasing accessibility to programs, information, and funding. Get away from this cookie cutter approach and start tailoring funding and policy mechanisms to the specific needs of local residents. So we invest in what is needed and where it is needed only. Additionally, we need to get ahead of the fire problem in these vulnerable communities. Members of the team at San Jose State are trying to understand how prescribed fire can be successfully used on private lands to reduce wildfire impacts for these populations. And then finally, I just want to bring up public safety power shutoffs, PSPSs. We all know about them. These events cause huge stress to our members of our community, and with those that have medical conditions that require constant access to electricity for treatments or refrigeration of medication. Maximizing notice to these populations is critical. And so overall, we need to better understand fire risk to optimize PSPS events and limit their impacts on these vulnerable communities.
Thanks, Craig. Eli, I want to turn to you as well out of Chico, and I'm going to hit you up twice, so you're going to stay on. So I want you to start with this question of vulnerability. Then I want to turn and ask you to lead us through the last question we have. So thinking about vulnerability.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. I think that with wildfires and wildfire smoke impacts, obviously it's now a story of commonality in the California narrative. We really need to understand how different groups of people are impacted so we can prepare, but also educate and respond more effectively to our communities when wildfire disasters happen. At Chico State, we had the Campfire Oral History Project, where we interviewed over 120 campfire survivors to examine the differences and the impact of the fire on various groups and how that influenced their recovery process, and particularly regarding food and housing insecurity. The project is a step into understanding the lived experiences of those living in rural mountain towns and how communities threatened by wildfires can affect their daily lives. This is something I know very intimately as someone who was born and raised up in Paradise, California. The campfire, I'd like to share some demographics of my hometown because I think there's a thread of similarity in other mountain towns in Northern California, especially the far north, where Chico State and Humboldt State are located. The median age of those that lost their homes in the campfire was 59 years old. The average house value was under $200,000, and the annual household income was just $40,000. These three facts alone let us know that people in the recovery process are in a vulnerable population category in age, housing, and income. More research is needed to understand how rural communities are able to recover and respond after wildfires. With the 12 rural counties in our service region, Chico State's uniquely positioned to do this and share this work to help Californians better prepare.
So Eli, thank you for bringing that up. And I particularly appreciate the connection to economy here, because our last question is about the intersection of wildfire smoke and economy and the impact on business and workforce related outcomes. And what should Californians be most concerned about in the context of wildfire and the intersections here?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, really, these devastating wildfires, once they've happened, the Camp Fire alone has cost over $10 billion so far and counting. It's devastated our region and completely destroyed a number of small mountain communities, with over 50,000 of our residents that lost their homes. So there's obviously massive environmental or economic impact to that. Our faculty in the geography department has been conducting cutting edge research to answer where did everybody go after these massive disasters, researching the migration patterns after fire and focusing on the mobility of people that are immediately displaced show us that many displaced residents relocate locally when possible, which further compounds housing shortages, which is also a crisis in California, and can contribute to a more polarized local economy. Very poor will remain unhoused and in precarious housing, while the more affluent will benefit from new supply of homes that working families can often not afford. I think that while there's obvious challenges to the economy, I think there's also significant workforce development opportunities that we need to think about. As wildfires challenge us in California, we need to be thinking how the CSUs are uniquely situated to prepare the next generation of land stewards and conservationists to really steward a healthier, more fire resilient wildland. We can train the engineers and construction managers to mitigate fire effects in the built environment and rebuild after these disasters. The farmers who are going to return carbon to our soils through regenerative agriculture, and planners who will design resilient and more fire safe communities. I really believe that CSU graduates will help us develop the more fire adapted California of the future.
Eli, thanks a ton. I really appreciate it. Michael, I want to turn to you with the same question about the sort of business and workforce related impacts that wildfires have and how we're thinking about that within the context of the work in the CSU.
Yeah, I definitely could echo a lot of what Eli presented. The cost of wildfire is often measured in lives lost, buildings destroyed, and acres burned. In California alone, the 2020 wildfire season had, as of mid-October, killed more than 30 people, destroyed some 8,500 structures, and torched a record-breaking 4 million acres of land. Doubled the acreage burned in 2018, the state's second worst wildfire season on record. But the total cost of wildfire extends well beyond these three metrics, starting with the money it takes to contain or suppress the fires, a figure that has grown significantly over the past 3 decades. There are also less quantifiable metrics that can be even more costly: disruption of businesses, taxes, and tourism, residents left with soaring medical bills, and polluted air, soil, and waterways. All this money spent on suppression means less money for prevention efforts, which is key to addressing the problem of wildland losses. And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway. You know, we have to focus more on the prevention aspect rather than the costly response effort.
Dan, similar question here. I know we're at time, and if people have to sign off, understand, but I want to give an opportunity for us to round out this conversation. So Dan, you know, if you want to jump in on this question as well about economics and the intersection with business and so forth.
Yeah, one of the things that's really important as we look at this problem is the consequences of these fires. You know, size maybe matters, consequences matter much more. What is the result of this fire? What does it do to the community? What does it do to the economy of that community? The well-being, the safety of the residents? Do they feel safe again back in their homes, even if they rebuild? What is that doing to our social structure? So one of the things that we city and regional planning folks at Cal Poly look at is, you know, what are the community design factors that really we need to look at as we build new communities? But importantly, what do we look at when we rebuild damaged communities? Do we apply the best technology, the best understanding of making those communities fire resilient, or do we rush to build them back just the way they were? And what history has shown us in this state over the 100 years, that we tend to rebuild communities back the way they were so they'll burn again. We have to be cognizant of that. What's interesting to us is that in land use planning, when you're doing CEQA analysis and so forth, severe winds is not a factor that has to be taken into consideration in the design and building of a community. We all know many of these fires are wind-driven events. Why aren't we taking wind into account? for the vulnerability of those communities, especially as we see more fires occurring. We do need to increase the workforce. We don't have an adequate workforce to handle all the prescribed fire and fuel management things that we're discussing. We just aren't out there. We need to work on the development of that. So I'll close, and thanks very much to everybody for your time.
It was like the Oscars, the music came on, all of a sudden everybody felt like, but Matt, I know you have some thoughts on this from CSU San Marcos. So I want to be able to let you jump in on here and then we'll wrap up. I want to say big picture, if you happen to sign off, we've got questions from people. We've got names attached to those. We'll definitely be following up. So Matt, do you want to jump in real quick?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, the economic impacts are devastating at the front end with the direct losses. The recovery costs are substantial as well, but the even longer term costs, when we looked at even, smaller scale, and by smaller scale, I mean, fires of, 200,000 acres or so, in those surrounding communities, you'll see an uptick of roughly $15 million in many cases of hospital visits related to respiratory and other issues, right? And so when you really start to think about the long-term consequences, that's something we simply don't have a handle on. But, a few years back, 11 of the 12 names added to the wall in Sacramento for firefighter memorial, 11 of the 12 were cancer, 65% nationally on the memorial in Colorado. And so if you look at those long-term consequences of just the first responders themselves, the economic devastation is severe. Add on top of that, what little we know about our communities as they are exposed to this. Look, as fires transition from, the wildland, I wish we'd stop using the term wildland in some respects, because they're all wildland urban interface now, right? It's not just vegetation burning. And so as we start to look at the devastation of vehicles and infrastructure and homes and all of the chemicals and things that we have in our businesses combusting at that time and entering the atmosphere, what lands on your skin and enters your lungs will forever have, a damaging effect on those people that are exposed. And so you might not see those dollars immediately, but over the long term, that's the devastation that's hidden. And that's going to be the issue that we need to deal with, over the next 20, 30 years.
Matt, thank you so much. So we got a whole bunch of questions, but only one was anonymous. So I want to read it because I think it actually helps us sum up the morning. Do you see an opportunity and greater need for the academy to work more holistically and cooperatively with both state and federal governments to maximize our scientific efforts with regards to wildfire and climate change? And I'm going to answer that question for us to say, absolutely. And that's why we're on this call here today, to not only talk about the critical and important work that we're trying to accomplish in the CSU, but to offer ourselves as partners to our local, to our state, to our federal folks to say we are willing and able not only to engage and build partnership to address these questions, but to help build the workforce of the future that's going to help really tackle some of the biggest questions we have. You can get right to the students, undergrad and graduate, through our research experiences in the Cal State system, and we are ready and able. So with that, I want to thank all the panelists for taking the time, for condensing what is very complex work into tangible, sort of digestible chunks. It's really exciting to learn about all the work that's going on across the system. So thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. We'll make sure that we answer questions that we see and get contact information out for all our panelists today so that all of you join the call will be able to connect and build deeper partnerships. This is only going to happen if we all dig in together. The Cal State can't do this alone. The government can't do this alone. The private sector can't do this alone. This is a big picture collaborative effort. So thank you very much. And thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it.